Hello everyone, Alistair Gold here. Very knackered. Just literally come back from the airport, from Frankfurt, London City Airport, which I think I've only gone through at night and jumped straight on a train once afterwards. It's a really cool airport. It's a bit of airport talk there to start the video, which I was not intending to do. But it's really cool. Like, you literally land right by the water. It's an Excel centre just over there. It's very cool indeed. But anyway, this isn't a video about airports or airplane spotting or anything like that. It's about the events of Frankfurt. Obviously, like I say, I've just returned from. Yeah, we're going to talk about it. Hey, it's better than Saturday. Most things are in life, but hey, it was progress. As much progress as a 0-0 draw can be. There's negatives, but there's a few positives. And just to kind of fill you in on the little kind of maybe behind the scenes stuff of actually being there in Frankfurt and various things and seeing what was happening. I hope everyone else that went there enjoyed themselves. I didn't actually see as many Spurs fans as I normally do. I just must have gone to kind of the wrong parts of town, if you know what I mean. That sounds weird. Actually, Spurs fans weren't allowed to go to certain parts. There was one district, I can't remember the name of it, a long one beginning with S, that they weren't allowed to go to because there'd been issues in the past. I think with a couple of West Ham fans got very badly beaten up. It was the Europa League, wasn't it? Semi-finals. Yeah, so Spurs fans weren't allowed to go there. And from what I was told, it's kind of the most interesting nightlife area as well. So they were obviously missing out on that. But yeah, apparently it was a little bit dodgy, or a lot dodgy. But yeah, I didn't run into too many, even in the main square where they meant to congregate. I just think I went at the wrong time. I've seen a few kind of thereabouts at the airports and stuff. They're all very nice people as always. But yeah, hopefully you all enjoyed yourself in Frankfurt anyway. I know a few people are going out on a Sunday and making a bit more of a 3-dayer of it. But yeah, I found Frankfurt interesting. I always quite enjoy going to German cities and stuff. It's kind of places I haven't been on holiday before, so to actually get to see these places that maybe I wouldn't have gone to anyway. And Frankfurt's quite nice. It's an interesting clash of styles, the city. So we had the press conference, which you might be aware of. I might have irritated Antonio Conte a bit, but you know, it's part of the job. That's fine. I had a question I needed to ask, and it was a question for all of you guys and girls. So that's absolutely, like I said, I think I said this in the last video. It's like, if there's an opportunity to ask a certain question that I feel is a relevant question, it's something that people are talking about, I will ask it. It doesn't matter whether it annoys the manager or not. Trust me, I've annoyed a fair few managers, not only in the Premier League, in non-league, in League Two over the years. Sometimes you've just got to do it because you've got to broach a certain subject. And if they don't like it, it's kind of part of their job. And yes, Antonio Conte didn't like it. A lot of these kind of top-level managers, they don't really like having their... how do I put this? They don't like having their decisions questioned, is probably the best way to put it. Even though I blamed you lot. I said it was the fans. We'll get to that in a minute. But to be fair to me, I guess, he was in a bit of a funny mood already when he came into the press conference. Exactly like Lisbon, they were an hour late because the thing with Spurs, they get a chartered flight out from Stansted. Obviously, they just literally popping down the M25, then M11. It's only like about 40 minutes or so to get there from Hotspur way, if that, on a good run. So they can go whenever Conte decides to finish training. So if Conte does longer training, they go a bit later. So yes, their loosely agreed flight time ended up going an hour later, and then obviously they rocked up in Frankfurt International Airport. I can't remember what it's called now. Frankfurt Airport, just as the press conference was meant to start. And then when it got to the Deutsche Bank Park, they had to then go and do a little bit where they looked on the pitch and had their photos taken as part of like UEFA requirements. So they did that, and then they eventually came in, and I could tell he was in a funny mood at the moment he walked in. His kind of head was hanging a bit. He didn't say hello. Normally what he does, which is like a nice polite thing to do, is when he comes to these sort of away day. To be fair, he does it in most press conferences, but especially away ones when he knows the UK media have travelled across. He comes in the room and he'll say, "Oh, hi," he kind of recognises us and he says hello. There was nothing. His head was down. It was a strange atmosphere because it was really empty. Normally these foreign press conferences are pretty packed and you've got loads of foreign journalists wanting to ask questions. We had literally, I think it was 7 members of the UK media that had travelled. We pretty much made up the press conference and there were a few German cameramen at the back and that was it. And so we knew we were going to kind of be running the press conference, which probably isn't the best thing for the manager because we're going to ask more questions, I guess, that I suppose test him a little bit. Whereas, the local journalists, and this is no disrespect to them, but it's because that's what their angle is. Often the questions are just, what do you think of the team you're playing against? What do you think of this country? What do you think of this city? That sort of stuff. Geographically based more questions. And then nice, easy fluff ones for a manager to deal with. So maybe when he sort of had oh, God, it's all of that lot, maybe he wasn't delighted about that, especially coming in from a North London derby. So there was no hello. Ivan Perisic went first. And throughout the whole of that, Conte was kind of zoned out looking, very emotionless, not really a flicker of emotion at all. Which is unusual because some of the questions were about him. So Ivan Perisic was being asked about things like, you took a little while to get used to Antonio's demands. Kind of what was that like? And also, what message did you give to the new signings that came with you this summer who might not have known his message? It was all interesting stuff. And I think I've certainly had it in the past where maybe Poch has been there with a player for a European press conference and similar-ish stuff or questions that have maybe been about the manager. And he's gone like, oh, really? And had a little joke with the player as they answer. None of that. Conte was just like this, just staring kind of down. It was like, okay, something's not quite right here. Fair enough. Perisic was interesting to a degree. I still feel that he would be better in a one-on-one situation. I asked him about his relationship with Ryan Sessegnon because Sess has said that he's really properly become a mentor type for him, and also Jed Spence as well. So I kind of asked him about that relationship and how he feels he needs to take on these younger kind of players, I guess, and give them everything kind of he knows, I suppose. And it was an okay answer. It was essentially talking about his past, which is fair enough. Talking about how when he was a young player, the older ones, especially when he was first in Germany, didn't really know German, they would come and help him, and he feels it's his kind of task to do the same, which is a nice answer. I kind of wanted a bit more about his relationship with the current Spurs people, but that's fine. I'll get him on that another time. So Perisic was okay. Then it came to Conte. First questions were all kind of run-of-the-mill stuff about injuries. Obviously, he said that he got very frustrated because he was talking about Kulusevski. He doesn't really know when he's going to be back. He said maybe Brighton, maybe the next Frankfurt home game. No. And he's like, I think he's getting a bit annoyed at these injuries and not knowing exact return dates, which is understandable. And also with Lucas's, because Lucas, like I said in the last one, had that setback and they've just got no idea when he's going to be back at the moment because it's so day by day the way he feels. I think Japhet Tenganga's got an injury now as well. Yeah, he has actually, because I was told that just before the match. Japhet, honestly, he's had so many injuries. It just never kind of gets a run, does he? He was a little bit kind of not in the greatest mood anyway. And then he was talking about injuries, which probably wound him up a little bit more as well. Then, who was it? I think it was Dan Kilpatrick from the Evening Standard asked him about Bryan Gil. Which he kind of swerved, maybe unintentionally, maybe just because it was packaged up as a 2-question thing, which isn't always the best with Conte. He'll either swerve the first one or the second one, depending on which one he feels like. And then he kind of swerved the stuff about Bryan Gil. So Dan nicely kind of followed it up and said, oh, and Bryan Gil? And he answered it. And it was, I can count on him, the classic, which Harry Winks was told about 8 weeks before he was dispensed with. And that was all fine. And I thought, this is setting it up nicely for my Jed Spence question. So I just said it exactly how it is. I said, look, the Tottenham fans are kind of really excited about seeing this summer signing. I know you said he's very young and he's got to wait and be patient and all of that, but has Emerson's suspension, has that opened up the door, I guess, a little bit for him to get some minutes now? So I think it was a perfectly legitimate question. It was absolutely fine. Just to look on his face, honestly. As he was answering the question, he was doing this. If you watch it back, he's doing this. It keeps doing that to his neck and plucking it. And I just kind of thought at some point, is he going to go like point at me kind of thing. It just kept going to his neck. And yeah, I'll read you exactly what he said if you haven't seen it. He said, where have we got it? It was so irritated the way he was asking it. The fans have to be fans. The fans is the fans. I understand that they can think everything, but I see every day what happens during a training session. I try to do the best for the team. If they trust me, then they trust me, but the choices are mine. If I didn't decide to pick one player, it's maybe because he's not ready. We're talking about a young player with a good prospect, but I repeat, I tried to pick the best team. And that was the first half of his answer. And which, just to say that that's a valid point, and this is something that I always try to kind of get across when we, myself included, want to see a player, is that we don't know what they're like in training sessions. The only thing I would say is Jed Spence would have to be unnaturally awful in training sessions to not even get a look in, when I still feel that Emerson isn't offering anything from attacking sense. And again, I felt that last night, but we'll talk about that later. And also with Matt Doherty having a tough time of it, trying to find his best way again. So yeah, I don't know. I don't want to say he's exaggerating or anything, but you know, it would seem odd for a player to have just arrived at a club not to be giving their absolute all in training and trying to take every single thing on board. But I guess, you know, he's a demanding man. You know, we've seen it with Basuma as well, so maybe. But yeah, I mean, spare. You know, just the problem is the fans are going to get more and more annoyed the less he turns to him. And then the problem he opens the door to, I guess, is that let's say he does using against Nottingham Forest, Jed Spence, in the Carabao Cup, and he absolutely smashes it. Conte will probably try to say, well, you know, he's playing against a championship team in essence, or whatever. Or he might go the other way. I think I've said this before, of saying, well, it's because of the wonderful work I've been doing with him, with the coaches. I don't know. But the pressure will then be on to keep him in the team because he's offered something different. I still feel he will. But I don't know. I'd love to know whether, because I don't think he was prepared for the question, which was interesting because I thought after Emerson's red card he would be, but from what I understand he wasn't. That wasn't kind of among the briefings of the various things that he might have to discuss in that press conference. And you could tell he wasn't ready for it because he got more and more annoyed the more he spoke. And the trouble was, I think, because he wasn't really thinking through his sentences entirely, it kind of stitched up Matt Doherty as well. And I've seen some kind of out of context ways this has been taken on Twitter, and I don't think it was true. I'm going to try and put the pause in the right position, right? So he said, I think he felt that, I can't just pick on Jed Spence, so I'm going to talk about someone else as well. So he said, also Doherty last season played every game. Which is interesting. He didn't call him Matthew this time. Also, Doherty last season played every game. Now, I'm not seeing him in the right way to start the game. I'm not stupid. I don't want to lose. I try to put the best team to pick the best team. If they trust me, it's okay. If they don't trust me, this is the fans, then I'm the coach and I need to take the best decision for Tottenham. But what everyone else heard, because obviously the transcripts and the answers that we were all writing out as journalists, was essentially talking about Doherty. Now I'm not seeing him in the right way to start the game. I'm not stupid. I don't want to lose. And that's not exactly how it sounded. There was a brief pause. It was a different thing, but running together. Poor old Matthew, it didn't sound really great for him. And I saw some social media accounts of various organisations trying to make that into something it wasn't really. But yeah, it's yeah, he wasn't saying if I picked Doherty that would be really stupid because we don't want to lose. That would be incredibly harsh. I'm intrigued to see who starts on that right wing back against Brighton, actually. But yeah, so that was the penultimate question of his press conference. And then, so he was already bristling and annoyed, irked. And then Tom Allnutt from the Times chucked in there another one that was kind of getting wound up as well. And it was another valid question. It was that, you know, in the days since the North London derby, various pundits have been kind of contrasting and comparing the styles of the teams in it. And obviously, Spurs are seen as the defensive side, whereas Arsenal was seen as the attacking side. So the question was, with that all in mind, does it kind of annoy you to see Spurs labelled as a defensive team? And yeah, you could just see he was a bit like underneath. He said, no, I think that for the characteristics of the players, we have to defend situations. And if we were able to exploit the situation, especially last passes, we would have been able to score many goals against Arsenal. I agree with him. There were a lot of opportunities that game could have gone in a different way in that first half. Instead, we made really bad mistakes for the last passes because we had the opportunity to go 1-to-1, but every team has to think and understand the way to play different games. Then I repeat, last season we won 3-0, and in the same way then when you lose you have to explain, and when you win the opponent has to explain. But for me it's important to try to have a plan, to put my players in the best possible situation to exploit their characteristics. Otherwise it can happen that you can concede 6, 7 or 8 goals. In England that happens a lot of times. In my career, never happened, and I don't like to play open and concede a lot of space and concede 6, 7 or 8 goals. In England it happened a lot of times. I won in England and then I won in my past, and I think I can teach football to many people. It was it's one of those where you're kind of thinking, oh, but you also as a journalist thinking, yeah, because it is. You can't actually see what I'm doing because my hands out there. I was going, wee. I was typing just in case it looked like I was only doing other weird movements underneath the camera. Yeah, I don't think it's any coincidence that the number he plucked out of the air was 6. Literally the day after Man City had stuffed 6 past Man United in a 9-goal game. Yeah, so this was essentially Conte saying, on top of the spent stuff, to everyone, you can go and do one, really. I've won lots of stuff. I know what I'm doing. It's quite fun to watch. And, saying, I've never conceded so many goals. And that line, I've won, essentially saying, I've won titles galore as a manager, yet people are criticising me. Like, who are they? And those final words, yeah, I won in England and then I won in my past, and I think I can teach football to many people. It was like, there was no smile as well. He didn't smile once during the whole press conference. And he's quite a smiley, funny, laughy guy in press conferences. Not at all in this one. He was very much, matter of fact, this is it. And you know what was quite interesting is when he leaves the press conference, pretty much every time he'll say, thank you very much. Not like Elvis, like, thank you very much. Like, very much. They just say, thank you very much. And he'll go out and he'll do the same thing that he does when he starts. He'll like wave and he'll do a little goodbye kind of thing. None of that. What he did kind of do was he gave me a little bit of a glare as he went out. It may have just purely been that he happened to be looking up at that point. But certainly for me, because I'm getting up to go and get my dictaphone, I don't know if you can see it in the video or not, but he definitely kind of gets up and he just goes like this, like that, and then kind of, it's only like it's a split second thing. And yeah, it was quite funny. He was fine with me the next day anyway, so I don't think it was like he was really annoyed at me or anything. But that's the price of winding him up sometimes, or any managers. But I like to see a bit of fire in a manager. I think that's a good thing. It shows he cares as well. But yeah, so that was the Monday. That was interesting. And then we had the match on the Tuesday, which was very late in Germany. It was 9 o'clock start, so I didn't get back from doing all the press conference stuff till we had gone 1 in the morning this morning. Yeah, how do I describe that match? It was, I think better, marginally better. It was a European game and they went there and never really looked in danger other than a couple of really daft Lloris kicks, which is becoming a little bit too regular again at the moment. I thought they played okay. It was one of those, it wasn't sexy football. It wasn't something that any of us were going, oh, what a great game. But I felt Spurs kind of went there and quite professional, did a job, and just had there been that little bit extra. We're going to talk about the struggles up front. They'd been a little bit better in some of the things they did up front. I think they probably could have run away with it. And I'd imagine, famous last words, but I would imagine the home game is going to be a different affair in terms, I think Spurs will probably be even more dominant. So yeah, but obviously we had another press conference after the match. And let me just make this very clear. From people that I know that have followed kind of Conte at other clubs, there's always some point, pretty much at every club he's been at, where he declares very publicly that he requires a bigger squad than the one he does. It's just what he does, and you kind of got to get used to it. And I think when he's talking about Tottenham, I presume it's more quality than quantity, is what he's talking about, because obviously we know some of those players, they ain't coming on that pitch. They're just not coming on unless there's an absolute disaster. And look, yes, you've heard me say I do think that it just could have been. I think it was a good window, but I think there could have been a little bit more done, especially with an attacking kind of option, whether that be a striker or whatever. But yeah, I think my awkward thing with it, or maybe his awkward thing, is I find it very difficult to be asking for a bigger squad. And to be fair to him, he's not saying now, he's saying across transfer windows. He is saying it's about time and patience, which is unusual for him. I think maybe those people I was talking about before in previous clubs would maybe say he was talking about now. Whereas with Spurs, there is a feeling that unusually maybe for Conte, he's looking at this as a bit of a longer project, which is a good thing, I think, for Spurs. But yeah, I find it a little bit iffy about asking for a bigger squad and more players when you don't really use many of the players you have. So, you're looking at... I was looking down at the pitch before the game, and there was Fabio Paratici, who was down there. The performance director, Greta Steinson, is number 2, essentially. And the head of football strategy, Andy Scolding, as well. They came only in the last couple of months. Steinson in July, Scolding in August. So they haven't really kind of made their mark yet, as it were. They were on the pitch and they were speaking to the Eintracht Frankfurt sporting director, Ben Manga, down there. And you just wonder kind of what they're looking down, they're thinking to themselves, look to that team sheet, exactly the same team that started the North London derby just, 72 hours earlier. And they're kind of thinking, well, Paratici, definitely. I've brought in 6 players for him. A 7th will come next summer in Destiny Udogi. But 6 new players. 3 of them can't even get in anywhere near the team. And he wants more new players. So there's 2 elements to it. I do believe there's a quality side to it. And I do believe that's obviously the Conte way. He wants ready-made now, expensive. It doesn't have to be expensive. I guess it has to be the right players. And on the other hand, there's the squad way of having these players that will become very good players, like the Jed Spencers of this world, which are maybe the kind of players that Conte, I'll have him in a few years, but maybe not now, kind of thing. So I just found that interesting that, for all the talk, he keeps referring, and it's fair, but he keeps referring back to the fact that essentially they finished last season with 12, 13 players and they had to supplement it with all the academy players on the bench. But he does now have a squad where there are 2 in every position. Now, he may not desperately want some of those others, the second one, if you were, in each position, but there is a bigger squad. And again, he was generally happy enough with it at the end of the window. He said he wanted more, but all managers do. And look, I mean, here's exactly what you said. I want to get this right. These are his quotes, right? Quick story time with Alistair, okay, or with Antonio. I think that last season we reached a great achievement for the club to play in the Champions League. If you remember, we finished last season with only 12 or 13 players. I always say that maybe we were lucky to go out the Conference League and focus only on the Premier League. We weren't able last season to face 2 competitions. Now we have to go step by step, have patience, take time. You need to have time and to build an important squad to face a competition like the Champions League. If you compare the Champions League, it is totally different to the Conference League or the Europa League. It's always a massive game and you have to play with the best starting 11. If you think, I want to make some rotations, and it is a bit difficult. We know the situation with the club, and the club knows very well we need time and patience to try to go step by step. I spoke about the transfer market, that we needed more transfer markets to reach a good level. I think it means windows there technically. We know this. At the same time, we want to be competitive, to try to do everything. Today I made substitutions and I played Hill. And Hill is a good young player. And we have to try to involve all the players. We have to try to do our best and then go step by step to improve and become stronger as a squad. We have the intention to play for these 2 big competitions, the Premier League and Champions League, 2 of the biggest competitions in the world. You lose a lot of energy, you lose players to injuries, and you need a really big squad. The problem is all very well saying you need a really big squad, but on the evidence of what we've had thus far, Conte only really rotates players when someone's injured, or there's someone that he absolutely trusts. So up front, you've got the 4, Kulusevski or Richarlison. he's happy with either of those. You can tell he, needed a 60 million signing essentially to provide another option, but he is happy with those, and he might be happy with Lucas when he comes back as well. He seemed to like Lucas last year. But yeah, so you'd imagine that. I think the other ones where he's quite happy with either or is Ben Davies or Clement Longley. I'd say both of those. He probably is happy enough with them. And I'd also say, Ryan Sessegnon. Ryan Sessegnon, he really has kind of got his trust. And, not only does Sessegnon get a fair few starts this season, but you'll also see that Sess is normally his first substitute he'll turn to as well. And that's, to whether it's the right or left wing back coming off, because he'll feel he wants to get him on that pitch. And that's a big thing for Sess, but it does kind of hark back to this, how many players does he actually trust? And also, I think the thing with Conte is he's got to maybe be careful of is that people, I think, will start looking back and they might say, look at when he won the league with Chelsea. And when he won the league with Chelsea, it was the year where they didn't really have any other distractions, whereas Spurs did. Again, so maybe a season where he didn't have to rotate too much and he got used to a set 11. And this is an accusation that's maybe about him in the past as well, is that when his teams have played in European competition, especially Champions League, they haven't done too well. So maybe that is, I don't know, there's something there, isn't there? There's something, obviously he's one of the best managers in the world. He's won league titles galore, but he hasn't done it in European competition. So I think people will then start to ask questions about, is maybe his weakness rotating? Is it? Is that the problem? But then if you're going to be pernickety about it, maybe if you're playing European matches in midweek, you are technically rotating one of them. You can't surely be playing the same 11 in every one and then still win the league, But yeah, I do think that's more and more people are going to start to scrutinise that a little bit. The more he says things like this and the more he just will pick the same 11. Because this is the thing. The problem lies elsewhere, away from those players that I said he's quite happy with. So you've got, he said before the international break, didn't he? Yves Bissouma, Matthew Doherty, in his words, and Oliver Skipp. I can count on them after the international break. I will be able to. None of them came off the bench in Germany. All three of them came off the bench in the final minutes against Arsenal when the game was done and finished. And he was just, might as well try and stop some of the main 11 getting injuries. And, like I said, Doherty found himself on the receiving end of more kind of bashing a bit by Conte as well. And, to be fair, from what I understand, I didn't see them, but from what I understand, his performance in the Republic of Ireland wasn't great either, his second one at all. It's a vicious circle for Matt Doherty because obviously he had that really bad knee injury. You just wonder, if Matty Cash hadn't gone into that challenge, where Doherty would be right now. I'd imagine he'd be flying. But unfortunately, there was such an after kind of math of that knee injury, all over the summer, still feeling pain in it and not really getting back to his level. But it's a vicious circle because he needs the minutes, I think, to get the sharpness, to get back to where he was. But he's not getting those because Conte's looking at him going, oh, you're not at Matt Doherty, I know, or Matthew. It's really, really awkward. And like I say, will Doherty get the chance at Brighton on Saturday? I think he kind of needs to. I do think he needs to. It's clearly not going to go for Jed Spence. Can you imagine if he just shocks everyone and goes for Jed Spence? And then if Jed Spence isn't very good, he's just going to turn to me and go, I told you. But yeah, you've got Emerson out for this time. So seems as good a time if he just goes with Sess on the left and Perisic on the right. I mean, Perisic is going to be knackered. It's kind of got to work in a different way. And Bassoum is probably the most strangest case of all because I get that he said about him not being as quick to pick up his tactical kind of instructions and also not happy with the defensive side of his game. But I was kind of looking back at some of the stuff I did when Bassouma signed it and I spoke to some of the journalists that covered him week in, week out. And he was, obviously, we all knew he was one of the best central midfielders in the Premier League in the last few years, especially outside the top six. But, I was told by the people around who followed him all the time when I was putting together pieces back then, he was one of the fittest players in Brighton's team. So fitness shouldn't have really been an issue. I know Conte's is another level, everyone says, but still, he should have had that base layer of fitness. But then also people would say the defensive side of his game was often his strongest side. and now Conte's saying it's not good enough. It's all very strange. I can only presume again in training he's not quite giving him what he wants. I can only presume that. I don't know if that is the case, but again, I'd imagine if you asked him that, maybe that's what he'd say. If he's not picking up the instructions, I can only guess that's in training. He hasn't been helped by the fact that he's had a few kind of little kind of niggling injury problems, little muscle things, and obviously had COVID in pre-season as well. None of that has helped him. But, you'd imagine going to his old club in Brighton at the Amex, knowing that stadium inside out and feeling at home there would be the best possible time to bring him into the team and give him a long run, maybe a 90 minutes or so. Because, 3 games in a week for Bentancur and Højbjerg, that's going to be risky, surely, against a very fresh Brighton side. I know between Tuesday and Saturday is that little longer gap because you've got the 3 days in the middle. And I think a few players will recover, but come on, you've got to start rotating. Unless, maybe the only way I could think is he thinks in his head, home against Frankfurt, maybe that's the easier game of the two, and he can maybe make more rotation, and I don't know. But it's mad. I think it was Dan from the Standard said after the press conference, when he'd been a little bit difficult and kind of funny, he said, I think he's going to pick exactly the same team. I don't think he was doing it to spite us, but just the way he was talking, and lo and behold, so it was. And then we had the lesser spotted Bryan Gil. Obviously, you'll know Bryan's story. 21-year-old Spaniard, very talented young player from Spain. Had Conte publicly telling everyone that he wasn't really physically suited to the Premier League. He did praise him back then, it was in February. He did say, he's a really clever guy, works incredibly hard, takes on instructions really well. But he said, just physically, he's not up to the Premier League. But yeah, on Monday, he said those dreaded words, I trust him. My only thing I would say is that it's been 8 months since Conte said he wasn't physically suited. And I remember Bryan Gil, while he was away on loan, saying that Nuno had tried to get him to kind of bulk up a bit as well. That's the only thing I would say, that in 8 months' time, he doesn't look like he's done any kind of strengthening. I know he's very fit. We saw that in Korea. He was kind of leading a lot of those running drills. But in terms of physical strength, it's not the easiest thing, I guess, to kind of pack on those pounds. And it may affect his dribbling style and everything. But it didn't look like he'd really done a lot to try and make his body more Premier League ready. That was only from, to be fair, I was very high up in the stand. So maybe I was a bit closer. Maybe I was seeing his big old thighs or something. I don't know. But from up there, it didn't look that way. And look, he worked hard in his little... He came off the bench for Richarlison. 20 minutes or something. I'm trying to remember how long it was now. He had a couple of nice touches, especially one moment where he ran back, tracked back, cut out a pass, and actually did a really nice dribble, which maybe Conte wouldn't have wanted him doing because it was on the side of the penalty area, Spurs penalty area. But he got away and took it away, and it was very nice. That was the pros. The bad side was some of his passing was dreadful. He'd kind of run up to a man, almost beat them, and then just whack the ball into them. It wasn't great in that respect. And I can only go back to the bulking up thing. He was knocked off the ball a lot of times. He really was. And there was one moment I was looking down and Conte was furious with him. It was another one where I can't remember, he'd either got knocked off the ball or he didn't go in and kind of challenge to get it back. It was one or two, but Conte was going like this to him. Like that. And he just kept doing it over and over again, really punching his hand at Bryan Gil. And I don't know, I could see Bryan Gil going like what? And whether he said something or not, I don't know. But Conte had turned away and he whipped back around and was really angry, started again, like that at Bryan Gil, as if to say, like, I could only presume he's saying, go in harder for the ball, be a bit tougher kind of thing. I can only imagine that's what he was trying to say. And he was screaming it. So whether Bryan Gil had said something a little bit, like, not an answering back, or Conte had thought he was answering back, I don't know, but the way he whipped his head round and really went at him. Yeah, it's such a weird situation because Conte even admitted on Monday in the press conference that, we wanted to send him on loan to Valencia, but circumstances obviously didn't allow that to happen. And presumably those circumstances are not being able to bring in a player of the required quality to replace him. But, it's just doing no one any favours. Killing his development, the club, Conte, anyone any favours having him there. It really isn't, because I do think he's going to be a very talented player, but that was the first time I kind of watched him and I thought, oh God, it's been 8 months since I've last seen you kind of playing any kind of football in the English game. Well, it's not an actual European game, but for an English club. And I don't know if you are going to adapt, because I think you would have worked incredibly hard over those 8 months to do that. I may be doing a massive disservice. He may be a stone heavier for all I know. But it just, in watching him on the pitch, it didn't look that way. So yeah. So that's the Bryan Gil situation, which was an interesting one. Yeah, we'll see. But on the whole, I do think he'll go out in January, by the way. I really do. I think for everyone's sake, I think it has to happen. Which necessitates a transfer coming in. So yeah, back to what I said at the very top of this video. It was an improvement. It was an improvement on the North London Derby performance, but quite frankly, sticking your head in a kind of a goldfish bowl would have been an improvement on what happened in the North London Derby, because they were so poor other than those 20 minutes towards the end of the first half. There were a few similar problems. Again, like I say, Lloris's kicking was pretty abysmal at times, sliced a few clearances, gave one to Romero in just a rubbish area. We just think, well, why? I know you kind of being encouraged to play out from the back, but don't give it to him there. And it just created all kinds of problems. It wasn't good at all. I think the guy put his shot over the bar from that one. He did make one decent save, Lloris. I can't remember who was their striker. Had a nice kind of turn and did a volley, which Lloris got his hand to and pushed away. So he did do that, but that kicking. And what was really kind of made it all the more exasperating was that I was watching before the game, and he doesn't always do this, but he was doing a big session on kicking. He had goalkeeping coach Marco Savaroni was in the centre of the pitch. You had Brandon Austin and Fraser Forster, and they were booting the ball at him. Lloris had to control the ball and then pass it back to them, whether it was a chip ball, along the ground, whatever. So it was really testing his kind of kicking ability. And he did nothing. It did absolutely nothing, because, again, he was very nervy in the game as well. Which I also thought was quite interesting. Fraser Forster, after they'd gone in, I haven't seen this happen before, he stayed out in the net and with, I can't remember if it was Savaroni or one of the other coaches, but had a proper session out there, as if he was starting the game for a little while. So I don't know. I could be reading far too much into that, and it may just be something he requested. But if I want to read far too much into that, I wonder whether they were putting him in there in the noise, because it was proper noisy by that point already, just before kick-off. Whether they were just kind of getting him back into the headspace of what it's like to be in goal in a big match, because maybe he's going to start a game soon. Because, Conte, if he is going to rotate, he might rotate the keepers, because I know keepers don't get tired. But mentally, they can't get mental fatigue, and maybe that's what Lloris needs. We always say, in the press guys, the best version of Lloris we saw was after he had that elbow injury when he came back. He was so focused and fresh and making up for lost time. He was brilliant. And so maybe he needs, just mentally, he's a bit kind of, it sounds, and look, when I say mentally drained, I know people are going to leap on that and go, oh, these footballers with their loads of money and all this sort of, how are they knackered mentally and all that? But, you're playing in a top level game in the Champions League. Your brain is focused so much. I can imagine it's, when you're playing every single game, it is probably quite a draining thing. So, yeah, maybe having one game off wouldn't be the worst thing. And, Fraser Forster played 24 times last season for Southampton, 19 in the Premier League. So, it's a guy who very much can come in and do the job if asked of him. Maybe that'll happen. If it does, you can remember back to this moment when I told you he was doing that little extra exercise thing. And up front, the other problem, which was the same as North London Derby, was that final ball. Oh, it was dreadful. Look, I'm not going to go into the whole Kulusevski thing again. It's pretty obvious by now. They miss his guile and creativity, his ability to play a through ball. Of course they do. He is superb, Dejan Kulusevski. I just hope he's back soon. But Harry Kane, Son Heung-min and Richarlison are good enough players to be able to string a decent ball between each other about 6 yards. They really are. So there's no real excuse. I actually felt a little bit different. I saw some people kind of having a big go at Son on social media after the game. I actually, personally, thought he was the brightest and most probably dangerous looking out of the three. I thought he was the one that looked like he was going to create stuff, and he did. But he played one in for... Oh, there was a really good curling ball. Who was that for? Was it Kane? Oh, it was the one that I think Romero got a flick on, and then Kane at the back post couldn't go out and get it. And then, obviously, there was the one where Sonny got into the box. I think he did a really clever dummy, then went, and Richarlison knocked it to him, and he whips it across to Kane. The only thing I would say is he whipped it so hard, and also kind of in the area of his nether regions. It could have been at his feet, could have been up his head, but no, it was right there. So kind of Kane had to thrust himself at it. I think it would have been a very painful goal to score. I think it was the only way we would have got that ball over the line. I'm intrigued to see now, because you've heard me talk about Sungmo Lee, South Korean journalist who I know does like translations of these videos for South Korean audience sometimes. I'm intrigued to see how he now transcribes this section about Sonny playing a ball to Harry Kane's nether regions. Very intrigued to see what the translation of that will be for the Korean people. But yeah, I thought Sonny was the best of the three in terms of passing. I do think Sonny's problem, and maybe it's a confidence issue, but I think his problem was the dribbling. There was quite a few times when he was dribbling and there was just one touch in the middle of the dribble would give the ball away. There was one, I can't remember what it was. I remember his like a second touch really letting him down. I do think that's a confidence thing. And that will come back. You know, that is just one of those things. It's a temporary issue. But I got the stats because I saw kind of people complaining about Sonny's passing, and to me, I was sure I was seeing it the other way around, that Kane and Richarlison were having more of an issue, and the stats do bear that out. So Kane's passing success rate was 61.3, Richarlison's was 60.9, and Son's was 84. So there was a big difference in their passing. I do think it was mainly his, his dribbling was just his touch was letting him down a few times. And there's also the fact that I know this is becoming a big thing in Korea, among some fans, Spurs fans over there. And I do think it's kind of fair to say at the moment, but Son and Perisic aren't clicking. They're not yet. I think they will, because they're both incredible players. I don't think it's a case of, I think maybe in Korea, from what I understand, there seems to be a thing of actually Perisic is a bad thing for Son and he's not passing or whatever. I don't know what it is. But I just think it's the fact that they just don't know each other's game well enough yet. And I think that will come. And obviously Son and Sessegnon know each other's game much better. So, like, for example, yesterday Sessegnon came on and within a moment had put across the 6-yard box that Sonny just hit wide. It was a tough one, to be fair to him. It was a tough one to try and get onto. So, yeah, I'd imagine from the outside it looks like Perisic is a bad thing for Son, whereas Sessegnon isn't. But I just think it is two players that have never played to each other, have just got to kind of learn each other's games, and that will come. It will. It's not. I don't think it's a position thing. I don't think he's pushing Sonny inside or anything like that. I think it's maybe just a case of just got understanding when one stops, when the other goes, and that's how all partnerships kind of are born. What I would say is actually Perisic didn't have a good game. It's probably up there with the most quiet I've seen him in a match. He wasn't good at all, and the problem was obviously you've got Emerson on the other side who's doing what Emerson does, which is get into good positions, because I do think he's got a brain for making really good movement, attacking football movement, but it's just what he does with it. So like Eric Dyer played a terrific ball over the top early on, and Emerson got in a great position, just hoofed it over the bar. And there were a few times when I think he just kind of gave the ball to Richarlison, which is what he does to Kulusevski, and maybe that is the best thing. But in those instances, you need Perisic to be then a danger down the left. I didn't feel he was really doing that. I think there's a quote coming up later where Conte said told me about not taking risks, and I didn't feel Perisic did. May have been a fitness thing. Excuse me. It may have been him being wary of his 33-year-old body, constantly bombing up and down a wing twice in 72 hours. It may be, but if that's the case, don't start him. Play Sessegnon. You shouldn't really be having to juggle that in your mind. But yeah, Perisic, I wasn't impressed. I think I gave him like a 5 in my player ratings. I had 5 or 6, I can't remember. What I wasn't yeah, it wasn't one of his best games. I do think he probably does need a rest for Saturday, but we'll see whether that happens or not. But Conte was happy afterwards with it, in the sense of, and it's true, they came to a place which is considered by the Bundesliga experts to be kind of one of the toughest places to go in the Bundesliga. They're a tough team, Frankfurt. I know they've had a few changes over the summer, but obviously they're a team that got to the Europa League semi-finals last year. They're no slouches whatsoever. But I felt Spurs went there and never looked likely to get less than a point. I think they never really looked at danger at the back. They had the bulk of the possession. It was a really noisy stadium, some great flag usage. Before the game, I was there like 3 hours before, and I could see they had massive flags at the bottom of the stand, and then above they put loads of ones, and it was quite a cool effect, and all of that adds to when Spurs have a big flag day or what kind of things they do. I do think it creates more of a an intimidating atmosphere, I guess. Even a flag, I do think it does. I think it's just a psychological thing of everyone being united together, I guess. Here's what he said, Conte afterwards. I think this was to my question, yeah. I think the performance was a good one. I think my question, just in case you want to know, because I know a lot of people complain that they can't hear us on microphone. You can in Champions League ones, they give us a microphone. I don't know. Everyone keeps asking me that. Why do they not give us microphones in the Premier League press conferences? I don't know. It's not my thing. I'm not there to go in and say, give me a microphone. It's not my job. You kind of need to ask the club about that. But my question to Conte was a better performance today, but still the through ball seemed to be the problem. How do you fix that kind of thing? And his answer, he kind of just wanted to talk about the game, but he did kind of talk about it slightly. I think the performance was a good one. It's not easy to play in this stadium, in this atmosphere with a lot of noise around you, but at the same time, from the start, we put a lot of pressure. We tried to be aggressive in every zone of the pitch. We did. There was a lot of pressing, to be fair. Then at the same time, I don't think we risked a lot, taking big risks. We created chances to score, but I have to find a situation that we need to improve on after this game. For sure, we need to be more clinical. Today we had the chances to score, and you know very well that football is simple. To win, you have to score. Otherwise, if we're lucky, if we're good, you get a draw. I think today, for the big effort we did with the whole team, maybe we deserved much, much more. I think the performance gave me great confidence. We coped with a difficult atmosphere to play here in the right way with great personality. I think that it's important for us to understand that to play at home or away, it has to be the same way. The personality, maybe, when you stay away, has to be stronger. Tonight, in this aspect, I'm really happy because I had a great response from my players. And that's the thing, the away thing is becoming a little thing at the moment, especially in Europe. We've spoken about this before, some of the horrific games from last season, the Muras, the Pesos de Ferreiras, the Royal Antwerp under Mourinho, Rennes they drew at as well, didn't they? They've had some very iffy ones, and obviously lost at Sporting this time. In fact, away from home this season, all competitions, I think, is it just the Forest win? I think that's it. It's definitely something that they have to kind of improve on. And obviously a team that had a lot of kind of decent European nights away and not too far past as well. I think there was something to build on. I do. I think the fact that, that group is wide open helps as well. But I do think it was a little foundation to build on. But now it all depends on kind of how he manages the fixture on Saturday at the Amex, which is a place the Spurs have always struggled. They really have. I'm trying to remember many games where they've really looked impressive. They've always had to really, really battle for it. And Brighton, I think they're fourth. They can kind of draw level on points with Spurs if they win the game as well. They are properly in form, even without Graham Potter. They've kind of kept that momentum going as well. Like I say, 3 games between the matches will help. It'll help him recover a few players. But he's going to have to think about changes. I assumed he'd go 3-5-2 purely for the fact that he's played all 3 attackers now in both of those games. And the issue now is, he's going to have at least 2 of them are going to have to play 3 games within a week, which really puts them at risk of an injury. And if not that, just being absolutely knackered. Unless Kulusevski comes back. I can only see he has to go for 3-5-2. I can't get my head around how a 3-4-3 would work again. But hey, I thought that this time. You think about it. Maybe he's got to consider Basuma coming in. Session, like I say, I think Matt Doherty maybe. Someone's got to play on that right wing-back role. Ben Davies maybe coming in for Clement Longley. Davinson Sanchez maybe for one of the back three as well. Potentially Oliver Skippy. Could have said Skippy, or you can see I'm knackered. Skippy maybe could come in if you wanted to go for a midfield three and go with Skippy, Basuma, and one of the others like a Højbjerg. I don't know, but like Eric Dyer's got to be rested at some point. Eric Dyer's going to be running to the ground. He took a big whack at the start of yesterday's one. He did a tackle, and I was a bit worried that was going to be Eric Dyer out for a while, but thankfully he was all right. Kane took a big whack as well later on. It was like went off the pitch for a little while, and got to get back to winning ways. Was it 1 win in 4 now? I guess you can turn it that way round if you wanted. Sonny spoke after the game. He said some really good stuff. Talking about Conte, he said it's important to listen to him. We saw last season that nobody believed we would be here right now. Last season, nobody believed we'd be in the Champions League. The gaffer always wants more. And as a player, I want to follow his way, or you know what's coming. If we don't follow him, then you know you struggle. We have to follow. There is no option because he's a winner. And I think that this is what we do. Sacrifice and do the hard things. And he was asked about what Conte's like, his emotions after matches. And he said, we're human. We're all emotional. Sometimes after the game, we're all happy. And sometimes we're all angry and frustrated. The gaffer is more passionate. If we win, he's like the happiest guy in the world. But if the performance is not good and he's not happy, he's the first one blaming himself and wanting to improve. And also, because that's the thing, Spurs scored obviously 6, didn't they, against Leicester, but away from home, they haven't scored a goal from open play in the last 4 away games. It's a little bit of a kind of a funny thing at the moment, and especially with a team with so many cool attacking players, like great attacking quality there. And Sonny said about that, I can't really describe this feeling. To be honest, against Frankfurt, I think we should have scored 2 or 3 goals because we had good chances for Harry and me. This is really frustrating because we know we just need half chances, but it doesn't go in, and this has happened in a few away games. It's not what I want, but it's always tough in the Champions League, and there's never easy chances to score. We're human, and there's still improvement. Obviously, this moment, it's really frustrating, but we have to move on to better things. And he was actually quite honest on himself as well, because obviously we had that fantastic hat-trick against Leicester, but then the last couple of games, obviously, he's drawn a couple of blanks. He was very honest about himself. He said, I look at it as a team, but obviously individually, I always want to do better. I've never been happy with my performance because I always want to do better things, amazing things, but it doesn't always happen like that. I'm always watching back my games to see what I can do, what I can improve. The season is still long, as I think it is long to go. I'm working really hard to help the team, so it's not an issue, these 2 games, because we had tough games. Sometimes you have tough games and sometimes amazing games. It's all in your mind, so we need to move on, even with these kind of tough games. And this is ultimately, isn't it? This is... Spurs are still 3rd in the Premier League. They are 2nd in their Champions League group. And, Sonny's kind of said, in his own word, essentially they just have to block out the noise from everyone else and concentrate. It's like, he said, this is outside of our group. And talking is something we can't control. As a team, as a great group, we have to stick together in these tough games, because I think these criticisms are because the expectations are higher. So we need to be thinking that way, the positive way. We know we can do much better, but there are still so many games this season. We need to do much better than we did, but I'm still believing that we can. That's it, really, isn't it? Conte's clearly he's come out swinging this week, really kind of putting his point across. Nobody wants to kind of have their methods questioned, I guess. And like I say, he'll point to that. Spurs being 3rd in the league, 2nd in the Champions League. And I've said this before, but it probably is a bit of overreaction. I mean, I've seen Conte out on Twitter and stuff like that. It's like, no. You've got one of the best managers in the world that everyone was desperate to get into the club. Just because at the moment his system isn't quite working doesn't mean it's not going to suddenly click. It doesn't mean he's not going to make a little change like he does. And yeah, I've said this a million times. I will say it one more time. If Spurs cannot click and have a bit of an iffy period and be 3rd in the league and 2nd in the Champions League group, that's brilliant, because other teams will go through their iffy period and they will lose matches and not pick up those points. So Spurs at that point will be flying again. So yeah, and I just kind of feel he just needs to do some rotation. He needs to trust more of his squad, but also trust the reaction that happens to players when they are rested and rotated. Just look at Sonny. Sonny was angry. He didn't want to be rested, and he came on that pitch and he smashed home the 3 goals. So it also has a different effect. Like I say, mental fatigue as well. Having that rest kind of sharpens their senses again, their spidey senses, and they come back able to do, big things. So, yeah, he's questioned the squad once again ahead of the January transfer window, which I know is going to bring. It is going to bring movement because of the World Cup. All clubs, I think, are going to be making moves, and I think, and Spurs will be, because, like I've said, I still think Bryan Gil and Japhet Tanganga will head out. If not others as well, maybe, you never know. So the replacements have to come in, and Conte will be demanding them. Of course he will. But ultimately he's questioned those players, and he's going to have to play some of them in the games coming up, and it's down to them to answer those questions and give a different answer. Like I say, Bryan Gil, unfortunately, there were questions about his physicality, his suitability, and last night came on and didn't really answer those. I think anyone else, he may get another chance, hopefully, but for anyone else, they just need to, like a Jed Spence, a Basuma, whatever, come in and say, you doubted me, this is what I can do. And that will be so big for Tottenham, as well as, that player. So there you go. Right, I'm going to head off. It's going to be a slightly shorter one than normal by about 5-10 minutes, because I've got to go and spend some time with the family, who I haven't seen, obviously, for the last couple of days. But I felt I wanted to quickly get a video out for you all, because things change so much. We've got the press conference tomorrow at Hotspur Way. Then the match on Saturday night at the Amex, which I'm really hoping the trains are back on, because the train strike's going to cause a bit of a pain. Otherwise, we're going to have to drive. But yeah, safe travels to all of you that go there as well. And then we're back in Champions League action again. And it just they keep coming now every 2 to 3 days. But I do love it. As knackered as it makes me, I do love it. I'd much rather have this than the big old break we're going to have for the World Cup, which is going to be horrible. But there you go. Right, I'm going to head off. Like I say, Conte tomorrow. I haven't even thought of what I'm going to ask him yet. I will think that up in the morning. Guest and I think, are doing our podcast in the morning as well, which took a little break because he was off last week. So listen out for Golden Guest Talk Tottenham. We'll have a little chat about all things Spurs on there as well. And yeah, right, time to head off. As always, stay healthy, stay safe, look after yourselves. I shall catch you later. Goodbye.